مرحبا، مساء الخير. كل عام وانتم بألف خير يا رب، وينعاد عليكم وعلى أسركم دايما بالخير والمحبة والسعادة. ويا رب عم بيكون إجازة لطيفة عليكم. مثل ما اتفقنا إن شاء الله بعد اللكتشر العاشرة وبعد العيد إن شاء الله رح يكون عنا 2 quizzes immediately. آخر 2 lectures حينزلوا قبل الكويزز هو lecture 11 و 12 اللي حينزلوا اليوم وبكرة بإذن الله، وبعدين رح ينزل عنا 2 quizzes. حبيت اقول لكم مع بداية هذا الليكتشر عشان تاخذوا بعين الاعتبار انه الكويزز رح تكون شوي مختلفة، مش رح يكون اشي له علاقة بالماتيريال على قد ما هو اشي اناليتيكال اكتر. بمعنى انه الاسئلة رح تكون كتير بسيطة وكتير سهلة، وبس حتعتمد على شوية مجهود انتو رح تعملوه. اهلا وسهلا فيكم من جديد بمحاضرتنا لليوم، واللي رح نواصل فيها حديثنا عن بعض اساسيات العلوم السياسية. Today we're going to postpone our talking and discussion about certain scholars or thinkers who discuss political science. We're going to talk in the first part of this lecture about post-behavioralism as part of the most important scholars and methodologies that studies political science. If you all remember, we already talked about behavioralism before, and as any other theory in this world, everything is accumulative. That's why we're going to talk about post-behavioralism. Post-behavioralism is the next step or reform of the movement of behavioralism, or the behavioral revolution, as we called it. In a similar way, it was again a way of explaining certain phenomena and events. This methodology was propounded by David Easton, who is one of the most important thinkers and philosopher, in his presidential address to the American Political Science Association in 1969, which relayed or revealed certain elements of the political science in that era. This methodology or this tendency laid new emphasis on values, on issues of justice, freedom, and equality. David Easton pointed out that post-behavioralism was further oriented, seeking to propel political science in new directions, in a new form, and to add rather than deny its past heritage. It was both a movement and an intellectual tendency in the same time, based on his methodology. Post-behavioralism emphasized on the facts as well as values. It is a reform movement within the discipline of political science. The two basic motivation of post-behavioralism is totally focused on relevance and action. Relevance means the development of such theories which can be utilized for the good of the society. The research techniques are good, but emphasis should be on using these research techniques to make theories which will answer the problems of the society. Here we are again talking about creating solutions, talking about finding solutions or making decisions to make society have better. What do you think to have a nice comparison between past behavioralism and behavioralism? Okay, to do so, let's start from the point that while behavioralism was a movement against traditionalism, the past behavioralism came also as a movement against behavioralism itself. But instead of condemning either of the two methods of thought, it was a little bit very systematically a synthesis between the two contending schools of thought. In this sense, or after this nice comparison, we can say that Behavioralism wasn't a new discipline, rather than it was just a new technique, a new approach, with a new focus and a view for the study of political science. The behavioral approach was trying to convert the study of politics into discipline based on the methodology of nature science. In that sense, we can see it as a new technique based on totally previous study. A new technique, a new methodology based on previous methodology. And as a result of that, mathematics was making its way in political science to the extent that it began to look more of mathematics than a science relevant to realities of social life. In their efforts at researching and application of scientific methods, behaviorists had gone far away from the realities of social behavior. In this way, political science again lost touch with the current and contemporary world. So, the same point that behavioralism depends on it as its uniqueness, it is the starting point for post-behavioralism to use against the previous style of behavioralism. Okay, let's talk more and more about this new school. The behavioralism which failed to solve any practical problems of the world even after spending years and years of researching. And despite all the attempts to develop new methodologies and techniques, many thinkers thought that they failed to produce new solutions for many problems. Therefore, post-behavioralism arose as a protest movement against behavioralism. The action part involves bringing about changes in the society by social action. David Easton, who had once started to study behavioralism, he enumerated 8 main characteristics of behavioralism and called them the intellectual foundation stones of the movement. He came out with 7 major traits of post-behavioralism and described them as the credo of relevance, or he was trying to produce a new image of the methodology itself and call it distillation of maximal image. These features can be summarized as following. Number 1, substance must have precedence over the technique. It may be good to have sophisticated tools, very important tools, techniques of investigations, but the most important point was the purpose for these tools were to be applied. Unless the scientific research was relevant and meaningful for the contemporary urgent social problems, it wasn't worth being undertaken. To the slogan raised by behavioralists that it was much better to be wrong than being vague, while the post-behavioralists raised the counter slogan, it is much better to be vague than non-relevantly precise, and certain anxieties for futures. If it wasn't the responsibility of political science to reach out to the real needs of the humanity, of what use political science was to society? This was one of the most important questions that post-behaviorists raised. They were asking a serious question about the function of the political science of dealing with certain problems in that time. If this science will not be able to answer and match the current needs of humanity and society, so why should we need it? A third point was that political science must not be value force. Behaviorists had put much emphasis on certain value-free approaches. This was a very unhappy situation. It was on value premises that all knowledge stood, and unless values were regarded as the propelling force behind knowledge, there was a danger that the knowledge was to be used for wrong purposes. Values played an important role in politics and research. They should not be thrown out from political science in the name of science. What does this mean? In very simple words, post-behaviorists thought that it is very dangerous to study any political movement or phenomena without a certain emphasis on values, because if we're going to talk about freedom, equality, etc., without concentrating on certain values, it will be very dangerous, because we're going to go back on focusing on government versus a human, for example. A fourth concept will be that political science should aim for social change and not for social preservation. In this concept, post-behaviorists said that contemporary political science should place its main emphasis on social change and not on social preservation, as the previous behaviorist seems to do. They think that to keep things changing, to keep the dynamic change of societies, is the only way to help these communities to be improved and to help them to solve their problems. But to keep things as it is, it's like you are keeping problems and make it more rooted. A fifth point was that political science should preserve the human values over civilization. The post-behaviorists intended to remind the political scientists that, being intellectuals, they had a role to play in the community. It was a serious responsibility to do the best to protect the human values of civilization. It is like giving civilization a new identity based on values, not based on industry or other points, for example. The sixth point that post-behavioralists claimed or used against behavioralism was that there is a need for action in place of contemplative science. If the intellectuals understood the social problems and felt themselves involved in them, they could not keep themselves away from action. Knowledge must be put to work. Easton pointed in one of his writings that to know is to bear the responsibility for acting, and to act is to engage in reshaping society. Contemplative science might have been all right in the 19th century when there was a broader moral argument among the nations, but it was completely out of place in the contemporary societies, which were sharply divided over ideals and ideologies. The post-behaviorists asked for action science in place of contemplative science. Number 7 was that post-behaviorists thought there is an urgent need to politics to be more professional. Once it was recognized that the intellectuals had a positive role to play in the society, and this role was to try to determine proper goals for the community and make society move in the direction of these goals, it became inevitable to draw the conclusion that these actions and the polarization of the profession of all professional associations as well as universities became not only intellectual but highly desirable, to turn on the new tendency of roles and functions. It's not only about having these actors, but also to change the pattern of the function of each action. The post-behaviorists replied to the argument that science had some ideal commitments of science and that behavioralism shared the ideal commitments of science, is that if science led its votaries to close their eyes in the facts of urgent social problems, the very image of science should change. The post-behavioralists didn't deny the importance of technical techniques and methodologies, but they didn't agree that the search for basic understanding and reliable knowledge necessarily implied that the scientist should not cut himself or herself adrift from the practical concerns of community, nor did they believe that values could be kept out of all scientific arguments. Another very important point that I would love to talk with you about whenever we talk about post-behavioralism is that post-behavioralism saw research as a very important tool to be relevant to urgent social problems, and they saw research as a very purposive tool. And they explained this point that if the present crisis in community or society arose out of deep social conflicts, these conflicts has or had to be resolved. If the resolution or the uh, finding solutions for these problems of the conflicts needed certain breaking up the existing political order, the political scientists should fairly and boldly ask for that. They think that scientists must not only reset content with suggestions about reforms or certain discussions. They even go for certain revolutions. They also asked for certain contributions with the best of the best to shape or to reshape the community in the direction in which it could serve the desired goals and efficiency. So they are not seeing the role of scientists as those who are took the theoretical aspect. They asked for certain practical. To conclude, post-behavioral approach, it doesn't mean a new wave of methodological innovation actually. It signifies stock-taking and reappraisal. There is no noticeable trend back to the vital aspect concerning value preference, identifying with the normative approach. The post-behavioralists didn't deny the importance of technical efficiency or technical need, but they didn't agree that the search for basic understanding and finding solutions and building knowledge necessarily implied that the scientist should not cut himself or herself adrift from the practical concerns of the community, nor did they believe that values could be kept out of the scientific arguments. They were trying to give behavioralism a new form to match the needs of the community. It was the duty of political scientists to find out solutions to contemporary problems. If the present crisis in community arose, they are part of finding the solutions, not only describing these solutions. They need to put a goal and direct the community towards the goal. It's not only to put goals. It can be concluded that from the traditional approaches to political behavioral approach, there is not only change but also continuity. It's like everyone was trying to put a new tendency of methodological approach or theory. They were trying to build upon the previous. The most important points about post-behavioralism was they were spotlight more and more on values, on the role of scientists, on putting goals and directing communities towards these goals. Okay, here we come. the most interesting part of the lecture and one of my favorites, our puzzle for today. Have you ever heard about SDGs? What are these SDGs? What is the abbreviation of this word? And would you please make sure to pick 3 of these SDGs and tell me why did you pick them? And try to make a linkage between these SDGs and our community in Gaza. It's very important to show me that you totally understand what you are talking about. So our puzzle for today is SDGs. Okay. Here we come. The second part of our lecture. We're going to talk about Marx. Marx is one of the most famous schools theories that definitely you heard about, a lot of people talked about, blah 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 blah. And actually to discuss Marx we need lectures and lectures and lectures. That's why we're going to talk about very precise part of his theory. We're going to determine certain elements which are relevant to our lecture and course in general. So, in the entire history of political thought, both on influence and criticism, few political theories can match Karl Marx. He was truly the last of the great critics in the Western intellectual tradition. His ideas was a very decisive influence on all aspects of a human transformation and development. Anyone who would like to study the history of political science and societies cannot deny the impact of Karl Marx. He was the first thinker to bring together the various strands of societies. Socialists throw into both coherent worldview and impassioned doctrine of struggle. Along with Friedrich Engels, with whom he shared certain thoughts in an paralleled partnership, Marx described the 19th century capitalism as scientific socialism or communism. Marxism is not only a critical theory of capitalism, but also a viable, very important alternative to certain thoughts and theories. Marxism is at once an orientation or a program of action and working class movement that describes many parts of social, political, and cultural aspects of the communities. Um, Whenever we talk about Marx, we need to talk about certain principal doctrines. In a way, they were not purely new, but he greatly amplified and systemized old, very old ideas and putting them into new and very effective combinations. He attempted to show that a socialist program must be based upon a very systematic interpretation of social evaluations and critical analysis of the existing system of production and exchange. His design was to show how a socialist community is to be built upon capitalist foundations. Marx described his socialism as scientific. If we are going to talk about how did Marx build his methodology, let's say that Marx inherited and integrated 3 legacies: German philosophy, French political thoughts, and English economics, and his theoretical foundation in general. Starting with the German intellectual tradition, he borrowed the Hegelian method of dialectics and applied it to the materialistic world. From the French revolutionary tradition, he accepted the idea that change motivated by certain elements of and messianic idea was not only desirable but also feasible. He applied his method with a view to bringing about a very large scale change with the industrialized capitalist economy, of which England was the classical model in the 19th century. He used the English classical economists to understand the dynamics of capitalism and the Industrial Revolution. Marxist political theory, also known as scientific socialism, Marx pointed out a scientific philosophy of the working class and an ideology to social change. He subjected that capitalist system to scientific analysis. He laid bare its explanation and explorative character. The Marxist approach has unique place in the study of politics as it is different from both rational and modern approach. The analysis is based up on economic orientation, up on social and political issues. Marxian analysis is rooted in certain historical and dialectical materialism, according to which history progressed through a conflict between two classes in which society is a way divided. According to Marx, all past history with the expectation of its primitive stages was the history of class struggles. These working classes are the products of the modes of production and exchange. History is the record of class conflict between those who own the means of production and others who don't, and this class conflict is the central theme and motive power in politics in general based on his theory. Marx identified certain five broad stages through which society has evolved. He presented these five stages in certain historical development as following. The first stage is primitive communism. In this first stage, where the modes of production involve hunting, fishing, food gathering, etc., at this certain point, classes have not yet emerged. In the second stage, he said that here we can see the slave system where the modes of production are animal husbandry along with domestic agriculture, small industry, masters, slaves. The classes started to be shaped in community. The third stage and the most important one is the feudal system, where agriculture on a large scale is the mode of production. The dominant classes are the landlorder, the landowner, and the other are the slaves or the serfs. This stage is succeeded by the capitalist system where the modes of production are large industry. The class structure has capitalist system where the mode of production is large industry. The class structure has capitalists and workers. Finally, there were the socialist system where though the modes of production are the large industry, there are no classes. All citizens belong to one class known as workers. Whenever we talk about the historical background, Marx believed that class is determined by the mode of production. In the capitalist society, for example, there are two classes, either the class they have and the class they have not. Marx holds that the struggle between classes and certain interests such as workers and capitalists under capitalism is inevitable. It is very clear and obvious that change is always sought by the oppressed and classes which has nothing to close except its change in context. The classes which are dominant have a definite interest in preserving the existing situation and order as it is. Marxism holds that the interest of classes cannot be reconciled nor changed possible by reconciling class interests. Class struggle is a product of the contradiction of production forces and relation of productions. It is indeed the driving force of social and historical change. When the contradiction between the production relations and the forces of productions reaches a climax, is defeated, and a new class takes over, thus a revolutionary or a qualitative change comes about when one mode of production is replaced by another mode of production. uh, the process of transformation of one mode of production into another involves social change. Such change is or must be revolutionary in a way than evolutionary. It indicates change not within the system but of one system into another. Class struggle is the driving force of such change and revolution of the previous situation. The only point that we need to spotlight here is uh, the techniques in which Marx try to analyze the community, the society, and the change of the community. They were using production as the core tool to analyze the community. Let's stop here in this lecture, and in the coming lecture we are going to talk more and more about the criticism of this theory. As all the previous theories we talked about, uh, Marxism also faced a lot of criticism. Meanwhile, please be safe and make sure to enjoy your vacation, and always remember, things are exactly how you want to see it. They are not what they are. Thanks and be safe.